There's a town in Turkey where, if you go into the right basement, you can find a door that leads to another world. Not a metaphorical other world. Not a spiritual other world. A literal, physical, carved from solid rock other world that goes down 18 floors beneath your feet and once housed 50,000 human beings who were hiding from some of the most terrifying armies in the ancient history of the planet. Most people walk past the houses above it every single day without the faintest idea it is there. The town looks completely normal from the surface, ordinary streets, ordinary buildings, ordinary people going about their ordinary lives in the warm Turkish sunshine. But underneath those streets, underneath those buildings, underneath the feet of everyone walking around up top, is one of the greatest and most extraordinary things that human beings have ever built. And the truly remarkable part is that for centuries, almost nobody knew it existed. The story of how it was found is almost too perfect to be real. But it is completely, 100%, genuinely real. In 1963, a man living in the town of Derinköy in central Turkey decided to renovate his home. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. He wanted more space in his basement, the way people sometimes do. And so he picked up his tools and started knocking down a wall. The wall came down. He looked through the hole he had made. And on the other side of that wall was a tunnel. Not a small tunnel. A proper, carved, ancient tunnel disappearing into the darkness with the clear intention of going somewhere specific. The man did what any curious human being would do in that situation. He grabbed a lamp and followed it. The tunnel went forward. Then it opened into a chamber. The chamber had doorways leading to more tunnels. The tunnels led to more chambers, which led to more tunnels, which led to staircases going downward, which led to more chambers, which led to more tunnels, and on and on and on, branching and descending and expanding in every direction until the man was no longer renovating his basement, and was instead standing in the middle of something so enormous and so ancient and so completely beyond his ability to comprehend alone that he went straight to the Turkish authorities and said, with understandable urgency, that they needed to come and have a look at his house. The authorities came. They looked, and what they found beneath the ordinary town of Derinköy was nothing less than an entire underground city. A city that had been carved by hand into the volcanic rock thousands of years ago and had been sitting there in darkness, sealed and silent and waiting, for centuries. They named it Derinköy. In Turkish, it simply means deep well. The name does not even begin to do it justice. To understand why someone would build a city underground, you need to understand where Derinköy is and what the world around it looked like thousands of years ago. The region is called Cappadocia, and it is one of the strangest and most beautiful landscapes on Earth. If you have never seen photographs of it, stop and look some up right now, because no description quite captures it. The whole region looks like it was designed by someone who had never seen normal geography and was just making things up as they went along. There are tall, thin rock formations called fairy chimneys, pointed spires of pale volcanic rock rising from the ground like enormous stone mushrooms, some of them 50 feet high, scattered across the landscape in their hundreds. There are valleys carved into soft cream-colored rock, with cave dwellings visible in the cliff faces. There are churches carved into boulders. There are entire villages built into and around these extraordinary natural rock formations, the buildings and the rock becoming so intertwined over centuries that it is sometimes impossible to tell where nature ends and human construction begins. The rock itself is the reason all of this is possible. Cappadocia sits on top of an ancient layer of volcanic ash that was deposited millions of years ago by a series of massive eruptions, then compressed and solidified over time into a material called volcanic tuff. Volcanic tuff is soft enough to carve with hand tools. A strong person with a good chisel can cut through it. But it has the useful property of hardening and strengthening as it dries out and is exposed to air. This means that if you carve a room out of it, the room will actually become more structurally solid over time, not less. The rock does the work of reinforcing itself. For the ancient people of Cappadocia, this was not just convenient. It was transformative. They were sitting on top of a natural building material that practically invited you to go underground. And go underground they did. The people who first began carving into the rock of Cappadocia were doing so at a time when this part of the world was extraordinarily dangerous. Cappadocia sat in the middle of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, which was one of the most heavily trafficked corridors in the ancient world. Every army that wanted to go from east to west or west to east had to pass through it. The Persians came through. The Greeks came through under Alexander the Great. The Romans eventually conquered it. The Arab armies of the early Islamic expansion swept through it repeatedly between the 7th and 10th centuries. Each passing army brought with it the possibility of violence, destruction, slavery, and death for the civilian populations in its path. The people of Cappadocia needed somewhere to go when an army appeared on the horizon. Not somewhere to hide for an afternoon. Somewhere to disappear completely, with their families, their children, their elderly grandparents, their animals, their food supplies, their sacred objects, their entire world, and stay hidden for weeks or even months at a time until whatever danger was passing through had moved on. So they went underground. And they built. What they built at Derinkuy is, even now, even knowing all the details, almost impossible to fully absorb. The city goes down 18 floors. 18. The deepest point sits approximately 85 meters below the surface, about the height of a 25-story building, but going down instead of up. The total area of the underground complex covers several square kilometers. At its maximum capacity, researchers estimate it could have sheltered somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 people, a figure roughly equivalent to a small modern city. But the numbers are almost the least interesting part. What is truly extraordinary about Derinkuy is not its size. It is the thinking behind it, the engineering, the evidence that the people who designed and built this place were not just digging holes in the ground to hide in. They were designing a fully functional, long-term, self-sufficient community that could survive underground indefinitely, completely cut off from the surface world, and maintain something resembling normal human life while doing it. Think about what that actually requires. You need air. You need water. You need food. You need somewhere for your animals. You need somewhere to cook, somewhere to sleep, somewhere to worship, somewhere to educate your children, somewhere to settle disputes, somewhere to make wine, because apparently even underground, in the middle of a siege situation with armies potentially camped above your head, the people of ancient Cappadocia were absolutely committed to having wine. And all of these needs had to be met in a sealed underground environment, potentially for months at a time, without any access to the surface. The builders of Derinkuy solved every single one of these problems, and the solutions they came up with, using nothing more than hand tools, physical labor, accumulated knowledge, and remarkable collective intelligence, would impress a modern engineer. Start with air, because air is the most immediately critical problem. If you seal 50,000 people underground in a cave system, the oxygen runs out and the carbon dioxide builds up, and everyone dies. This is not a small engineering challenge. The builders of Derinkuy solved it by constructing a ventilation system, a network of vertical shafts running from the surface straight down through all 18 floors of the city, creating a flow of fresh air that circulated continuously through the entire complex. The main ventilation shaft is 55 meters deep and 4 meters wide, a vertical column of rock that they excavated entirely by hand, working from the top downward, keeping it straight and structurally sound through 55 meters of solid stone. This shaft alone represents a staggering feat of engineering for people working without any modern machinery or measurement tools. It took skill, coordination, patience, and a very clear understanding of how air moves through enclosed spaces. The water supply was handled with equal ingenuity. The builders found underground water sources at various depths and constructed wells that brought fresh water up through the rock at multiple levels of the city. These wells had a brilliant security feature built into them. They could be blocked from below. This meant that if an enemy found one of the ventilation shafts on the surface and tried to poison the water, the people underground could seal off the wells and prevent contamination. The builders had thought about this specific threat and designed a specific countermeasure for it. These were not panicked people digging holes in a crisis. These were calm, methodical, extraordinarily intelligent people planning for every possible scenario. Then there was food. Entire levels of Derinkuy were dedicated to storage, vast cool underground chambers where grain, dried foods, oil, and wine were kept in quantities sufficient to feed the entire population for months. The constant underground temperature, which stays cool and stable year-round regardless of the scorching Turkish summer above, made these chambers naturally perfect for preservation. The underground cold did the work of a refrigerator for them, keeping food fresh and safe far longer than surface storage in the extreme seasonal heat of the Anatolian plateau would have allowed. The animals, cattle, sheep, horses, were housed in large stable areas carved out on the upper levels, with stone rings still visible in the walls where animals were tied, and drainage channels cut into the floors that still show the practical, unsentimental thinking of people who understood that 50,000 people living underground with their livestock was going to require some serious sanitation planning. But here's the part that gets to me most. The part that makes Durinkui feel less like an ancient survival bunker and more like a genuine human community that was simply underground rather than above it. They built a church. Deep in the lower levels of Durinkui, carved from the same pale volcanic rock as everything else but shaped with unmistakable architectural intention, is a chapel. A proper cruciform chapel, the cross-shaped floor plan that is the signature of Christian ecclesiastical architecture, with a carved arch ceiling, proportioned like a real church, oriented correctly, with space for a congregation and a carved stone altar at the front. The walls still bear traces of the plaster that once covered them. And you can imagine, because you have to imagine, the frescoes are gone, the painted saints and biblical scenes that once looked down at the people praying here, 50,000 of them underground, listening to the armies moving around above and asking God, in the lamplight of an underground church 85 meters below the surface, to keep their children safe. There's also a school. A long narrow room with stone benches carved along both walls where students could sit and teachers could stand at the front and conduct lessons. This detail undoes me every time I think about it. They were hiding underground from armies that wanted to kill or enslave them. They had every legitimate reason to focus entirely on survival, and they still carved out a room for teaching children. Education could not wait, not even for an emergency, not even underground, not even with soldiers above their heads. There are wine presses, their circular grinding channels carved into the rock floor. There are kitchens with smoke channels cut into the ceilings to carry cooking fumes away from the living areas. There are meeting rooms of different sizes. There is even what appears to have been a detention room, evidence that the underground city maintained not just community life, but something resembling law and order, because apparently the social contract does not get suspended just because you are 85 meters underground hiding from an army. And then there are the doors. The security system of Durinkui is, if you are the kind of person who appreciates brilliant engineering, genuinely beautiful. At regular intervals throughout the tunnel system, at the entrances to important areas, at key junctions, at the most vulnerable points in the passages, the builders installed rolling stone doors. These are massive circular wheels of rock, sometimes weighing several hundred kilograms, carved to fit exactly across the tunnel passage and rolled across it from the inside to seal it completely. The critical design detail is this: these doors can only be operated from one side, the inside. An enemy who had found a tunnel entrance and was pushing their way through the passage toward the underground city would eventually hit one of these stone wheels rolled firmly across their path, with no handle, no mechanism, no way to move it from their side. The people inside could hold the doors shut indefinitely, and if they needed to retreat further, they could move to the next section and roll the next stone door shut behind them, creating layer after layer of sealed compartments, a sequence of barriers that an invading force would have to fight through one by one in the dark, in a narrow tunnel where their numbers gave them no advantage and the defenders knew every turn and every dead end. It is, honestly, genius. Terrifying circumstances, genius, born of necessity and fear, but genius nonetheless. Durinkui was last used as a refuge in any significant way in the early 20th century, when the Christian communities of Cappadocia sheltered there during periods of violence and persecution. After the population exchanges of 1923, the underground city was abandoned and largely forgotten, its entrances sealed or buried or simply no longer remembered by the people living above them. And then a man renovating his basement knocked down a wall and found a tunnel. The underground city was open to the public in 1969, and it has been drawing visitors from around the world ever since. Hundreds of thousands of people each year descending through the low passages and past the rolling stone doors and through the stables and the church and the school and the wine cellars, all of them wearing the same expression. The expression of people who came here knowing intellectually that they were going to see something impressive and are now discovering, in the most immediate and physical way possible, that impressive does not cover it. Here's what I keep coming back to every time I think about Durinkui. These were not extraordinary people in the sense that history usually means when it uses that word. They were not kings or generals or famous inventors. They were farmers and tradespeople and priests and parents and children. Ordinary people living ordinary lives in an extraordinarily dangerous world. They did not have machines or computers or modern materials or engineering degrees. They had chisels and hammers and rope and oil lamps and each other. And faced with the most terrible and ancient of all human problems, how do you keep the people you love alive when the world is trying to kill them? They came up with an answer so complete, so thoroughly considered, and so deeply human in every detail that it still makes people from the 21st century stop in a carved stone corridor 85 meters underground and stand very still for a moment, thinking about the lives that were once lived in this darkness. They went underground to survive. They brought their animals and their food and their water and their faith and their wine and their children's education and their sense of justice and their need for community and their absolute refusal to stop being human even in the worst circumstances imaginable. They sealed the stone doors behind them. They lit their lamps. They waited. And eventually, always, the armies passed, and they came back up into the light. That is the story of Dorinkui. Not just a story about an underground city. A story about what ordinary people are capable of when they have to be. And honestly, knowing what they built down there in the dark, I think the answer is quite a lot more than we usually give them credit for.